whether or not you want to go after luxury, you really need to understand what type of luxury client you want to go after, how they spend their money, what they value spending money on, how they signal their money. Marketing to those types of clients is very different because
welcome to the Venue RX. On this show, we document and share best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues.
What is up, everyone? Jonathan here with the Venue RX, and we have for you today a guest who's coming back on the show. She was incredible the first time we had her, and especially everything that's happened in the last couple of years since we chatted. We're going to talk about some things that you're going to absolutely want to know for your venue business, or really, even if you have any business in the event space, you're going to want to hear this show. So Liene Stevens with Think Splendid, thank you so much for coming back on the Venue RX today.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
All right. Well, this is going to be good. Literally right before we pressed record and started recording, I had to cut you off because you just started. I was like, stop. No. Let me press record because it was so good what you were going into. So I want to just go right back into it. We were talking about a Instagram post and you said, and I even just want to pull it up here, exact numbers are, let's see, you said you were charging $15,000 for your services in 2019. You now need to be charging $18,500 to earn the same amount. If you were charging $15,000 in 2023, you now need to charge $15,500 to earn the same amount. I shared how we were tracking some of our management fees with CPI, like yearly CPI, and you were sharing why tracking and understanding inflation and the impact that it has on our businesses is so important. So could you just jump right back into that? And catering, the implications there, just let's pick right back up there.
Sure. Obviously, weddings are more expensive. Inflation impacts that. Inflation happens every year, some years more than others. And like you said, you've been starting to track CPI in your management fees. CPI is the Consumer Price Index from the U.S. Department of Labor. If you're outside the U.S., your country has its own. So you want to calculate based on your country's numbers. There are calculators online for free. So if you just Google, even if you just Google 15,000 in 2019 today, those calculators will pop up. It's very easy to find them. And so people may see, oh, you were $15,000 in 2019 and now you're $18,500. Why is this just post-pandemic greed? Are you just capitalizing on the fact that 2022 was a boom year for weddings and you just don't want to lower your prices back down? What's going on? And the fact is, you're earning the same amount. You're not making more money. You're charging more money, but dollar for dollar in purchasing power, it's the same amount. And so some people think inflation shouldn't play into pricing. And I think that's a very basic 101 understanding of pricing because inflation absolutely does. And we were also talking about weddings are just more expensive in general. And some of it is still supply chain issues that were either created or exacerbated by the pandemic, especially in the floral industry when they had to kill crops in 2020. Some of those crops are just now coming back. Climate change is a big one, especially with flowers and food product. If you are a venue with in-house catering and you offer cakes or any other type of food and you handle F&B in-house, then vanilla and cocoa right now are at all-time record highs on the commodity index in the history of the world. They are the most expensive. Vanilla right now is more expensive, I believe, than saffron, which is historically crazy expensive because of how labor intensive it is to harvest. And one of the reasons for that is climate change. So Madagascar is responsible for was about 70% of the world's vanilla bean exports. And about 5 or 6 years ago, a typhoon came through and ruined a lot of the crops. And they rebuilt and did that. And then last year, another typhoon came through and ruined those crops again and just set them back. Uganda with the Rwenzori Mountains is a great place for vanilla to grow. And so they have picked up a lot of the slack, but they are also facing their own challenges. And they didn't have, it's not as well-oiled machine as an operation that Madagascar had, because that was a main economic source for them. So part of it is just that it's scarce. Climate change is a big reason the cocoa prices are high right now as well. Climate change for flowers is huge, especially when you consider the rain patterns. So in South America, the way that the season has shifted, when it's rainy season and when it's not, has shifted when the crops bloom and when they haven't. And so they're different and they're available at different times. And it's been shorter crop cycles. And in some cases, it's ruined the crop cycles altogether and they've had to start over as well. So there's a lot of behind the scenes factors that go into total wedding prices across the entire supply chain. Both those examples with the food and the flowers are farming examples. And one thing I really appreciate about the wedding industry is that at the beginning and at the end of the entire supply chain, so when the flower is planted, when those seeds are planted, to when the couple is sent off on their sparkler exit in their getaway, it is small businesses feeding their kids, putting their kids through school, all of that. Now, some of these farms are commercial farms and they're huge businesses now, but all of them started small. All of them started small. And I've been to the rose farms in Kenya, and Kenya is responsible for 80% of the roses that get imported into Europe. And the women working there, it's primarily women, they are able to pay their kids' school fees with this money. And I mean, some of the farms pay well, some don't, but there are farms that pay very well for that local area. And because of the AIDS crises and other situations, there are a lot of single mothers. And so this is a way for these women to work and put their kids through school. And then you have a single mom who's a wedding planner, and she, is paying for her kids' college tuition through her job. So I really appreciate that from beginning to end. This is largely small businesses, creators, farmers, people putting in the work with their hands and creativity, and not just someone in an office in an investment bank running the whole show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for putting context around this. I think for our industry specifically, because, from Facebook groups to, conversations that we have with people, we know that things are getting more expensive. We know the impacts of inflation from a kind of conversational level. Here in California, and I know this has been reflected in other places as well, but, In-N-Out kind of famously raises their burger prices. And it's like, wow, we're paying $1.20 more for a burger. You like In-N-Out, you pay the $1.20 more, but people will have a problem jumping from 15, right, to 15.5. Why the additional $500? Are you just trying to make a buck? And it's not. It's because literally that's the same purchasing power, like you said. And so I think giving people a practical way to explain that to their clients, and just business owners being armed with that information to say, hey, no, like as they're talking through pricing, the reason why we charge this is because this is the same amount that I charged last year. Actually, just the dollar amount's different, but it's the same exact amount. And so that's good. I wanted to get your take on this. How do you think we can do a better job, we as event professionals can do a better job of communicating our value around these pricing increases? Maybe on more of a surface, more of an in-depth level than just saying, oh, well, inflation, we have to keep up with inflation. Like, how can we communicate this? Is it about somehow building in extra value, increasing client experience? What are some of the things we can do?
Well, that's a multi-layered question. Just giving me the softballs here. The client experience definitely matters, especially, so I use the example of if you were charging 15 grand for your services, photography services, whatever it may be, because my consulting firm specifically works with people working in the luxury and ultra luxury wedding market. So these are 6, 7, 8-figure weddings. That's not applicable to most of the industry. 81% of couples last year spent $30,000 or less on their wedding. That's a fact. However, a lot of people work in that 19%, and that's still hundreds of thousands of couples worldwide spending in that 19%. So it feels like a smaller number, but it represents a huge amount of people. And so even if you're going from $4,500 to $5,000 for a site fee, or, $1,000 to $1,500, it definitely, guest experience and customer experience is always has to be on point when you are asking for a significant amount of money. There's an argument to be made that even if you're selling a 99-cent pack of gum, it should be on point. And that's true, but most people will overlook it. But we are in the hospitality industry. We are in the service industry. We are the hired help. We might be expensive help, but we are the hired help. And that means being helpful and being kind and not treating these couples like their wedding is just a number or it's just another one. We know from stats that in the United States alone, there are around 46,000 weddings every weekend. No couple wants to feel like they're one of 46,000. No couple wants to feel like they're one of 3, 4, or 5 if your venue is able to do multiple events a weekend. They want to feel like they matter to you, that they're the only one that matters. And so really looking at your process and seeing, okay, how do we reply to emails when they come in? How are we on the phone? How do we conduct a site tour or a show round for potential couples? How are we conducting site inspections for planners when they come to visit? Do we work with planners? Are we easy to work with for good planners? And listen, I know some venues hate working with planners because they've gotten the terrible ones. And that's not just the new people. We've all worked on or attended events that were planned by people who've been doing it for 20 years and they were terrible. So it is not just, length of time in the industry doesn't always necessitate talent or a better experience, but it's a chance to really look at that. And if you are combative with wedding planners, especially luxury wedding planners who have the potential to bring a week-long buyout to your venue versus a one-day event because they want to do the welcome party in your ballroom and then the actual wedding in a tent, and that tent is going to take a 5-day build-out for a 3-day, multi-day wedding weekend. That's 8 days of what revenue you have right there. That is a huge revenue source for that versus you trying to sell a Friday, a Thursday, a Sunday, whatever. So how you interact with those planners, what your process is, and maybe changing who you're networking with to make sure you're networking with the right planners. And I don't mean that with like the cartoon dollar signs in your eyes of like, oh, they do bigger budgets, that's who we want to go after. But like people who share your brand's values, people who share your company values, people who are good to work with as well. I mean, there are planners who completely leave venues trashed for the next planner to come in the next day, and then they're behind schedule and the venue's flustered and whatever. So you definitely want to, if you can look at your process and see, how can we make the guest experience better? And a lot of time that goes back to seemingly unrelated things in your operations and SOPs.
Pardon the interruption, I wanted to take a moment and share with you about WEVA. WEVA stands for Wedding and Event Venue Association, and it is a professional association custom built for venue owners and operators. We felt like there was a lack of resources, community, education, and networking available specifically for our industry, And so we recently started this association and it's been growing by the day. We would love to extend an invite to you, so please click the link in the description or wherever you're watching this video, and we would love to welcome you into the community.
Do you have data? You were talking about planners, specifically luxury planners. I know you have so much experience in the luxury market. Do you have any sort of data on how many of those 6, 7, and 8-figure weddings are not using a separate planner that is not connected with the venue? Is it almost 100%?
Is it almost 100% who are using a planner that's not the venue?
An outside, like, distinctive planner, like a luxury, maybe well-known planner.
Yeah. I don't have the numbers exactly off the top of my head, but I have the ballparks.
Yeah,
so,
that's perfect. It was kind of a spur of the moment question that I had. Yeah. We're throwing that out.
For luxury, which is $96,000 to $500,000 spent on the wedding, not including the honeymoon, it is in the 60-ish% range. And again, people are like, oh, only 60%. And I'm like, that's, 3 out of 5, 4 out of however, I can't, math in my head is not great. But, and then for ultra luxury, which is $500,000 or higher, it's in the 70-ish% range. Now, that doesn't mean they aren't using a planner at all. Sometimes they do use the in-house person at their venue. Sometimes, especially if they are ultra high net worth, which is an SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission designation. It's not just a marketing term that people have latched onto, which means those people have 30 million or more in liquid investable assets. So it doesn't include their primary residence. It doesn't include several other things. Like these are wealthy, and the billionaires are included in that. They have what's called family offices to manage their investments and manage their affairs. And a lot of those single family offices where they're only working for one family have in-house planners as well. Now, if it is a couple who, hosts all the time and is receiving dignitaries and they made their money, in being a big business or whatever, they're going to have a lot of dinner parties and all of that the in-house planner is responsible for. So sometimes the in-house planner is the one sourcing the venue and sourcing the photographer and sourcing the videographer and sourcing the florist, and then outsourcing and sourcing the planner. If they decide to work with a planner because their event plate is already full. So they are actually the main point person for everything logistical and boring for the planner to work with. And then, the couple gets to come to the tasting and, see the mock setup of the design, and they get to do the fun stuff, but their in-house planner is doing that. And do those people have the capacity to build out a week-long tent build? Of course, but they just don't have the time because their plate is already full with the dinner parties and the receptions and, the whatever at the Aspen Ideas Festival or whatever they're doing. So, and then if it's at a country club or a private club, they'll often use that in-house venue planner as well, because that is usually, at that level, it is usually more than just a catering salesperson or venue coordinator, right? That's a different level. So they usually do have some kind of help, but it isn't always a professional wedding planner, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And country clubs, it's interesting. We've just started working with a venue just outside of Birmingham. And as we're learning about the market, directly, what is that, southeast, I guess, of the Birmingham area is a very, very wealthy area where a lot of those couples are going to be going to the country club because that's what their mother did, or that's what, there's some sort of family tie or generational tie to that area. And so they are going to be using those, that team, whatever that list of vendors are that services that community, if they are those high net worth individuals or children of those high net individuals who are in that area. So having a knowledge of that is extremely important. As we're talking about the luxury market, Could you give us, for anyone who hasn't listened to, and I'm going to actually link your original show here because I want folks to go back and listen to it for a little bit of context. But when you're talking about luxury weddings, specifically here in the United States, is this something that you would recommend people aspire to? Or because you kind of gave could you repeat the percentages again? You said of the weddings that are in the US, we were looking at like 80% of them are around the $30,000 level. Was that?
Those are global numbers.
Global numbers. Okay.
Global. And we do, we adjust for purchasing power based on each respective country's GDPs, inflators, but that's global. So the 19% spends 31,000 or more, and then 5% spend 96,000 or more. And it's 3% for luxury. No, it's 2% for luxury for last year, which is 96,000 to $500,000. And then 3% spent over $500,000, which breaks down to 360,000 couples last year spent over $500,000 on their wedding. Now, that includes Brazil, China, India, and in India, it's customary to spend about a third of your life savings on the wedding. That's just culturally how it's done. So these are big, big numbers, right? But these weddings are there. And in the US, a lot of money is the weddings. You're not going to see them necessarily on Instagram. So I always like to share this stat because it tends to blow people's minds. But there are more millionaires living within a 2-hour radius of Cincinnati, Ohio, than there are within 2 hours of Washington, D.C. And if you stop and think how much money is in Washington, D.C., and, that includes Chevy Chase, Maryland. That includes like all those rich enclaves. And there's a lot of money, not just in those 2 hours of Cincinnati, but there's a lot of money in the Midwest. And it tends to get glossed over of like, whatever. Warren Buffett lives in Omaha. Like, let's be real. There is a lot of money there. And the subcultures will impact how people display their wealth through events. And so some people want to be showy culturally. They want to be showy, whether it's for shallow reasons or just a signifier for other things, the term quiet money, quiet luxury, I don't love right now. It is the term because of Sophia Richie's wedding, and there's just nothing quiet about that wedding. But I don't love that term because it is based on the socioeconomic status of white people who didn't have to prove anything because they already had it all. And then, the history of race in America, people of color weren't taken seriously unless they had a very clear signifier that they could afford and were at the same earning level. And then that became another way to cast aside of like, you have to show a logo, so no thank you. So both of those are valid markets. There's valid ways to go after both of that. But a lot of luxury is inconspicuous and discreet, not necessarily for those reasons, even though that still plays a role. Unfortunately, like that's just culturally how it is right now. But because people don't want their friends and family to feel bad. They don't want to come across as bragging. They don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. And even if they don't care about that, they don't want the bad press. Mm-hmm. And in times of economic uncertainty like this year, which if you look at the math, if you look at the numbers, the US was able to avoid a recession. It doesn't necessarily feel like that, again, because of the inflation, because of other things. But those are the numbers. Most jobs created since the Great Depression. Those are facts. Again, doesn't feel that way. And people buy and make purchases based on feelings, never on facts. So, working with luxury, like in the Midwest, the attitude is very much going to be, oh, we're not fancy people. We're not fancy like that. We just like what we like. And they like very nice things. You go into their house, it's a normal house. And if you know the fabric on their sofa was a gajillion dollars a yard. But most people aren't going to know that, right? Like, it's that kind of thing. They have very nice things, but it's understated or unstated luxury. And so for their events, they're spending a lot. I call this stealth wealth. You don't even know. Maybe you know they're wealthy, but if you look at an event, it's going to look like a pretty nice, classy, maybe a little bit boring event. And you don't realize that, that tent that they had the wedding in was on a private estate venue on the side of a mountain. They weren't going to flatten out the ground. And so they actually had to build an entire structure at various heights to make it level to architectural standards to support 200 people dancing, and then put the tent on that and then hit it. And then, that's a real example of a wedding.
I was going to say it was very specific.
That's a very specific example, but that's a real example. And that happens more often than people think. It's not like the only example, but that one was just for the structural build to support the tent and make it level on the side of a mountain was $400,000. So that's the stuff you're not going to see. And then you look at the flowers and you look at the pictures, you're like, oh, this is a nice, classy wedding. Obviously they spent money, probably $100,000, not even close. It was over a couple million, right? Yeah. So you're going to see a lot of that. And whether or not you want to go after luxury, because I think that was your initial question, you really need to understand what type of luxury client you want to go after, how they spend their money, what they value spending money on, how they signal their money. If they do want it more understated, if they do, especially in small towns. And again, the Midwest has a lot of wealth because of farming and industrial and all of that. And they just don't, you're in a small town, you don't want your neighbors thinking that you're like all hoity-toity and too big for your britches. Like, you're still in the community and they know you're wealthy, but it doesn't need to be in their face all the time. So there's also that attitude. And marketing to those types of clients is very different because they're not going to want their stuff on Instagram. Most of the time, they're going to require an NDA. And so as a venue, you're not going to be able to use those photos for your marketing, even though it's bringing the income. And so it is a very different approach. And you have to decide if you want to invest the time, the money, the energy into marketing to that crowd or not. There is a lot of money to be made in the mass market of weddings in that 81%. It is, Target makes a gajillion dollars a year, right? Like, mass market is huge numbers, huge money. And if you can do volume at a great quality, there are people doing that and they're making bank and they're living a great life. And so it's also deciding what you want out of your life, not just your business, and how much is enough, right? What number are you going to be happy with? And I say that, and I always recommend you have 3 numbers. Your bare minimum number that you need to hit. So if it's like 2020, what's keeping the lights on and people employed and food on the table? Your ideal number. This is, you have an ideal life. You can splurge on a few things. You don't have to think about the price of milk or whatever. You can take a vacation or 2, but you don't get every single thing you want. You're not like just a spoiled brat, right? And then your dream life. And that includes your dreams. So if you want a vacation home, if you want to donate a ton of money to a hospital and have your name on the wing, if you want to build an orphanage, if you want to pay for your entire family's, your own kids, your niece and nephews, your grandchildren's college and grad school educations debt-free, right? What are your dreams? Because it's going to be different for everyone. And that is your dream number. And then set your sales goal based on those and work backwards from those. So those numbers reflect you and your goals, because especially with independent venues, you got into this for lifestyle, usually. A lot of people they made a great living at their job and they're like, we're going to retire and have a venue and it'll be passive income. And it is not so passive, they learn. And which is why your company, the management company, is great. It's like, we'll take the headache, you keep the ownership. But and sometimes it's different things. Like it's usually a lifestyle decision to start a wedding venue, and it's an alternate stream of income. And with that means if you are working all the time and you can't see your kids and you don't have time for your marriage or relationships or friendships, or you don't have time for your community, I don't know. That's not how I define success. If that's success to you, great. Probably don't hire me. We're not going to be a good fit. But a lot of people wouldn't define success that way. And so I find that when people don't set a number of like, oh, this will be enough, they're just continually driven by the impossible. Because of inflation, that number is never going to be enough. You're always going to need more. You're always going to want more. You're always going to be going after the next thing, and you're never going to have time to sit back and be content and be like, wow, look how far we've come. And I'm enjoying my life now. And I know with my goals, I'm going to be enjoying it still in 5 years, and we'll just have a beach house to enjoy it at then. You know what I mean? There has to be something where you say, these are my goals, these are my dreams, this is the number for me, and I'm okay if it never goes beyond that, because I'll have everything I could dream of.
Hey there, pardon the interruption. I wanted to share with you about WEVA. WEVA stands for Wedding and Event Venue Association, and it's a brand new association just for venue owners and operators that we launched last year. It's been growing quickly since then, and we would love to offer an invitation to you to be a part of it. WEVA is an association that is purpose-built for venue owners and operators to provide community, education, and networking opportunities just for our industry. We have a number of different resources, including networking, co-working events, local meetups, and all sorts of different things. We will be having a large yearly event as well. We would love to have you part of the community, so please consider joining. We do have a link in the description below, or we will be linking it wherever you're listening to this. So please click on the link, check it out, and we would love to see you inside of WEVA.
I want to ask, gosh, there's so many things I want to ask. I almost want to do a little exercise. This is very impromptu, but I'm curious. If you and I together right now, we're going to say we have an investor who's going to, fund this thing, and we want to build a venue that is going to reach a luxury market. Okay, so we've got the whole U.S. Let's just do the U.S. for right now. How are you going to approach that task of saying we want to build a venue, or we're going to buy a venue that is specifically going to target luxury clients, that 97 to $500,000, right? What are we doing? What are the steps that we're going to take? How are we going to look at that? Given the fact that you just said there's money all over Midwest, quieter money or stealth wealth, like you said, what processes, what steps are we going to do? I'm going to run it. You're going to consult me. How are we going to think about this?
Well, if you're bringing me on in the development building stage, I am going to do, I like to say there's 3 levels. There's, a site tour, which is what the couples and the client's customers do. There's the site inspection, which is what a planner does, an event designer. They're coming in with their planner eyes and saying where are the water sources? Are there outlets here? How is this ballroom going to configure for whatever? And then what I do, which I call a site audit. And I come in and I look at everything. And if we are in the development stage, then I'm meeting with your general contractor and I am advising them on things they need to look out for that impact weddings that may not impact anything else. So one very great example of this is it's been a trend recently in building venues or in remodeling, renovating venues to make the getting ready areas, the preparation suites with built-in makeup chairs. And, you have the beauty bar like a salon, the 5 makeup chairs that are adjustable height, the mirrors. So you can have 5 people being styled at once. And then there's can lights above those chairs, which cast shadows and doesn't work. And so the lighting wasn't considered for that. And then the lighting is all on one control. So if you turn those off, you're turning off the whole room. And it's a great room to just like chill, hang with your girls for the day and have that bonding, getting ready experience. But the lighting's going to cast shadows for the makeup designer. It's going to definitely F with what the photographer's trying to capture. And depending on the lights you choose, it's going to render the color incorrect, both in camera and with what the makeup artist is doing on the skin. And so a lot of times makeup artists will bring their own ring light that can go various shades. But sometimes venue owners will think about that and they're like, great, for this, I'm going to bring in, a salon interior designer and they can give. And so, but then they're putting in salon lighting, which with a salon, you want people to look their best the entire process of cutting their hair or doing their makeup. And so that tends to be warmer lighting. But for a wedding, it is much more like a commercial shoot, and you want that lighting to be more like a green room at a professional television station with a certain color index. Actually, you want it above 90. You want it to mimic daylight as much as possible or the studio light. If it's a corporate event and you have stage lighting being brought in, it needs that makeup. Even if it's men and, the makeup artist is powdering their head so it's not glowing. There definitely is lighting considerations and wears. So I will say track lighting is the best because it's adjustable. If you have the ability to put in lights that can do the whole range from cool to warm, that's great. And if that's out of the question, even just for your listeners right now, investing in a few ring lights, like high quality ring lights, not the cheapy ones that an influencer will get, but like the really high quality ones that have the different lighting settings in the right color index. And so we're going to look at that on the site audit. I am going to look at the size plates you use for F&B if it's in-house, because even reducing that by like 0.5 centimeter saves, I'm forgetting the number. It's like a significant % of food waste, right? And so that goes back into your profit margin. I'm going to look at your power source. I'm going to look at, are you on well water? And if so, what's the backup generator situation? Because electricity going out is one thing. Electricity going out and taking the water with it is a complete different situation. So we're going to look at all of that. And if I can be brought in at the beginning with the contractor, with the architecture team, with the design team, we can really get into that nitty gritty of this is much more like a commercial photo shoot, even though it's not. It's a sacred event. I really hate when people treat weddings like a photo shoot, and especially when they treat them like a marketing photo shoot. Like, this is someone's day. Like, use the photos, but like, let's remember the point. But still, if you make that investment in your venue up front or when you renovate, like those little things, like the lights, for example, not everyone hires a makeup artist. Not every makeup artist is good. Not everyone has the budget for it, especially if they are in that 81%. And so if the lighting's there and they're doing their own makeup or their sister's doing it for them or whatever, and all of those photos are going to be better straight out of the camera. They just are. So your marketing imagery is already going to be better because you put in lighting, you spent the money on that in a way that was reflective of this also needs to look great in photos. This needs to translate to how the camera captures it. And really great makeup artists will bring their own lighting. Most of them will bring ring lights anyways. But some of these new salon style getting ready suites, there's really no place to put that ring light, because it was designed with the recessed light. And so anything you can do to make everything better. And even if you aren't allowed to use the photos, they signed an NDA. You can't use the photos. It's going to make their album better. It's going to make their video better. And that's going to make the word of mouth that you need better, all because of lighting. And they're not going to know why. They're just going to know, I look amazing. And everyone looked amazing. And the makeup artist is going to get the credit. The photographer will get the credit. But there's also going to be, because they've all been bridesmaids or groomsmen in other weddings. They've all attended other weddings, had their makeup done. They're like, I don't know, there's just something about that place. I look amazing every time I'm there. Mm-hmm. Right? So those little things go a long way in guest experience. And it's hard to, you can call it out on your website. Like, we have lighting that'll make you look great on any camera. But it's still like, those are little things that really high-end places will pay attention to. And if you want high-end clients, you also have to pay attention to them.
That makes so much sense. Something that I've been realizing, and this is kind of in the same vein as the inflation conversation that we were having earlier, the couples who are getting married each year, and I'm not sure about the data around the percentages, but I know that the amount of couples who are getting married each year kind of is around the same level, maybe even, depending on the data you look at, slightly declining in terms of just the number of couples who are getting married. In that same year period, year over year, we're seeing exponentially more venues that are opening. And that's been over the last couple of years post-COVID. And I think fueled by some of the COVID kind of upheaval, has created an interesting scenario for investors who are buying properties and then maybe not realizing the benefit of that. You're smiling, I'm smiling. I know this is true. Like, this is happening right now. And unfortunately, there are businesses that are going to go out of business. There are businesses that are going for sale. What is your comment on kind of what's happening right now in the industry with supply increasing, demand kind of staying level, and venue owners, new and kind of the incumbent venue owners, that are struggling to stay afloat in this sort of environment?
I have a lot of opinions, like usual. Like, there's no surprise to anyone.
And I want all of them. I left it so open. So fire away.
Like, wow, Liene Stevens has an opinion. News at 12. So I think a few things. First, you mentioned that weddings are staying the same, and that is accurate. And people don't think that's accurate this year. This is a weird year, right, for booking. Like, the inquiries are very slow to come in for a lot of people, and they are either booking years in advance, even though the venue has capacity, or they're booking, they're calling and saying, I'm getting married in August. Can we book? Right? And that's the planner, the venue, the whatever. And they're spending a lot of money. Like, this is not a, shotgun wedding situation in the sense of like, oh, we're just gonna, elope. So but Signet Jewelers, who owns, they're responsible for 30% of the jewelry market in the US, I believe, or maybe 30% of engagement ring sales. Whenever, a few years ago, they're a publicly traded company. They own Jared, they own Zales, they own K Jewelers, they own everybody, Blue Nile. And so sales were down post-pandemic, and they needed a talking point. And so they have a great PR team, and they coined the term the engagement gap, and said the reason sales were down was because people weren't getting engaged. Well, that sounds nice, except, like you said, the weddings have stayed at the same numbers. So we typically see in the US alone 2.2 to 2.4 million weddings every single year. 2022 was a boom year. It went up to 2.6. It's now dropped back down to the 2.2, 2.4. So we're still at normal levels. However, during election years, spending is always slower because, and studies have, like, people have studied this. So this is not just a hypothesis. Like, they've studied this, economists have studied this in various industries, and it's true in events as well. People are much more risk averse. Even billionaires with money are much more risk averse to liquidate cash to, like, spend on a wedding during an election year because of the uncertainty of the outcome and the uncertainty of what policy changes may be coming. And they feel better and more secure having that money in the bank than spending it. So they get to a point where they're like, well, we don't want to put on our full life. Let's get married and we're going to liquidate $1 million and, like, let's book the venue and the planner and 3 months, let's go. Right. So we tend to see the shorter time frame inquiries at the higher end and some at the lower end. And then the ones where couples want to save and take their time in the mass market, 81% range.
Interesting.
That said, that's not the only reason. But also this year, 2024, 70 countries are having elections for primary leaders, including the United States. And usually in the US, you know what you're going to get because there's an incumbent candidate. And then the other one hasn't been president yet, so you don't know. Well, we know exactly what we're getting on both sides this time. And no matter where you are, you have thoughts about it. No matter what side of the aisle on, you have thoughts and you have fears. And people are very scared of Trump, and there are people who are very scared of Biden because we've had both and we know what we're getting. And we all have opinions on which one you should be scared of. However, this is impacting every single person because we know what we're getting. And yeah, there are going to be policy changes no matter who gets elected. And so there is that, maybe I should, like, hold on to my money and not just spend it, even though I have billions in the bank. Not me, obviously, but, you know, a potential ultra wealthy client, they'll still spend the money, but people's hangups about money don't go away when they become wealthy. Oprah has a question that she likes to ask all the billionaires that she interviews. And it's, are you ever scared that it's going to go away tomorrow? That you'll wake up tomorrow and it'll be gone? And every single person has said yes, including herself. Every single person. The ones who come into it, generational, you know, billionaire wealth, maybe a different story. But the others who are quote unquote self-made, it's always like, yeah, I remember what it was like to not have it, and now I have it. And so, like, your internal hangups, if you haven't been to therapy to work through them, they're still going to be there. And so everyone tends to think that, like, wealthy people will just spend the most amount in every category across the board. And that is not true. So the, knowing the original question was about the 2.4. And the influx of...
Yes, influx of wedding venues. Supply, yeah.
Yeah. So part of it is the going to that point of people don't value the same things, and they do have hangups about money no matter what. And this is a weird year. And so the same amount of people are still getting married. So supplies, you know, or the demand has stayed about the same. However, people are also getting choosier because they have options. So they are going to be looking at your customer service. They are going to be looking at your guest experience. They are going to be looking at how fast you answer an email or return a phone call, whether you treat them like a number. They are going to look at the attitude that your cater waiters have on the day or during the walkthrough or whatever. Like, they're going to look at all of that because they know there are more options. They're also going to look at how up to date your inventory is. A lot of people in the wedding industry, and this isn't just venues, this is across the board, still treat everything like it's 1995 and then blame the market and blame the economy when they're not booking. It's like, well, we've not had those puffy sleeves since 1991. Your marketing's way out of date. The flowers you're offering are way out of date. Your linens don't touch the ground, and no one wants to pay for an upgrade so the linens touch the ground. Your food is terrible and still tastes like rubber and like cold broccoli. The, so even the ones that aren't that extreme, there are trends that are, they're maybe behind on the trends. Yeah. And with social media and the internet, the lapse in keeping up with trends has shortened so much. And so it started on the coasts and moved inwards. And now it's kind of everyone wants the same thing. The ceremony rings have been out for years. The dripping flowers are quickly on their way out. And at the ultra luxury level, those flowers from the ceiling, they're very gone. And it's a very understated look, not so much conspicuous consumption now. And they're doing a lot with other decor elements, whether that's the lounge furniture with like custom pillows and custom wallpaper that's removable and just put up for that event, that kind of thing. And then like all the flowers are just these low flowers on the table. And sometimes those are very labor intensive still, depending on the arrangement, but it's not the volume. And so even making sure that you're up to date with what people want.
I have a question about this. I've just been dying to ask, and I think I've been waiting to find a way to ask it in the right way, and I think that time has come. If right now someone is building a venue, or they're looking to buy a venue, what is the venue style that can best withstand the style changes? And I want to leave it at that, but we know like there were churches, and then there were banquet halls, and then there were barns, and that's going out. And what's kind of a safe bet for the structure that can't be altered as quickly as changing a menu or buying some new linens or something like that?
I would say, again, this would depend on your brand. You don't need to make it so vanilla that it doesn't have its own mark. Stately homes, in Europe are always going to be in demand for certain people, that Downton Abbey style. The barns aren't as popular now. That doesn't mean they can't be renovated to look a little bit more modern and not so typical barn shape, right? But if you are in an area that a lot of the architecture is Frank Lloyd Wright, mid-century modern, that's going to do very well because it fits the community. If you are if you're in, trying to think of other places with like very specific architecture. I think a lot of times you don't just want a warehouse box that you can repaint every time the trends change, right? Like you do want something special to your brand that maybe isn't so niche that it can't be updated in a certain way. The, Ohika Castle is a very specific look, and they book because people like that look. And the people who don't like that look aren't going to go there. They've got a trillion other venue choices in the New York area to go to. And so I think if you're building, approaching it more like you are designing a hotel versus just a turnkey commercial space that can be used for a venue. Like really have an identity to it, commit to that identity, commit to that brand. And if you are building multiple, Like if you are investing in multiple venues and building multiple, maybe have a few different styles so that you're capitalizing on the different things. I think having the interior be able to be as blank slate as possible is great, meaning an event designer can come in, carpet the floor or not. They can, it's not ugly, but it's not, especially again, lighting fixtures. Lighting fixtures drive so much. Like if someone has to hide them, that is so labor and expensive and like behind the scenes production expensive to like hide your ugly chandelier. So that can be, like making sure that you're kind of adaptable for an event designer to be able to come in and say, wow, I can do this with this space, or I can totally do this and still keep it in the vibe of the overall architecture of the place. What I see is people will, build out this very ornate fireplace or whatever. That's not really, you're either going to have to hide it, and that's a big chunk of the budget. Because again, it's labor intensive production. They have to build it out, or they're just not going to hire your venue. So like, if you're going for that, we don't have we want to be adaptable. I would say interiors as much as a blank slate as possible, but that doesn't mean like all white and boring. Mm-hmm. But carpet especially, my God, like we don't need the ugly carpet. We also don't need the gray wooden floors, the whitewashed. That was a very specific millennial gray, millennial pink look, and Gen Z's not loving it. So, and I think if you can keep up with the changes with minimal investment, like a new coat of paint, new carpeting, do something like that. It's not a full renovation where you're bringing in, a contractor and making sure things are up to code. Like it's relatively affordable to repaint something. I think that's a better way to do it.
So what I'm hearing is create the structure, the canvas basically, that gives you the flexibility to repaint it or refloor it or do these different things that can change the style of it, but you don't necessarily have to change walls or things like that. Big structural pieces. And then lighting is kind of like the big, like if you have lighting combined with a space, I don't want to say box, but like the unique rooms, the getting ready areas and the main reception space and the ceremony space and whatever those spaces are, to be malleable enough that a couple years down the line, 5 years, 10 years down the line, you can create a different feel or a different environment. That's really the best hedge against style changes. Or, and this is kind of what you said in the very beginning of this, go very niche, very specific, Frank Lloyd Wright, or go like castle, there's always going to be a market for like a castle, or if you're in an area where there's vineyards, like having something around the vineyards, or like there will be some of those things that will come back through. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. With the lighting also, that's something that both an event designer on a site inspection and someone like me, a venue consultant, comes through for a site audit is going to look at is where are the rigging points in your ceiling, not just for lighting, but also for if we do want to do hanging flowers, if we do want to do something like that. And, or are you a historic property on the registered list? And so it's truss only because you're not trusting anyone to rig anything from the ceiling. I mean, there's a famous hotel in New York that an event designer went in, like effed up their ceiling because they did not rig it correctly. And now nobody is allowed to do anything on the ceiling. It all has to be freestanding trusses. And really paying attention to if you're wanting it to be able to look to be an artist playground, basically, a designer's playground, and they can come in and have fun with it, especially in the luxury place where people are hiring, a David Beam, an Ed Libby, a Rishi Patel. When they're hiring those big designers, a Preston Bailey, they can come in and say like, yes, we can create all of this. And if they don't have to spend the budget hiding anything, that's either more they have this to spend on other creative elements or more on F&B. They can move that budget item to something that benefits you directly, right? So I think if that's who you're trying to attract, making it in a style that's adaptable and easy for them to work with without being just an empty warehouse.
I love it. Awesome. Liene, thank you so much for coming on today and chatting about this and like just the stage that we are, like the time that we are in, with it being an election year and with everything that's happened with COVID. I mean, when we first talked, it was a pretty crazy time because of all of that was going on. And we're still, we had COVID and then now we're in election year. So it is a very interesting time in the economy, a very interesting time to be in events, and interesting meaning challenging. I know many people are winning and doing very well. Many people are struggling and really figuring out what they're going to do in their business. So conversations like this really, I think, help to get the wheels turning and help folks. Could you give us a quick rundown on what Think Splendid is, what you do, and if they want to hire you or talk with you, what's the best way to reach out?
Sure. So Think Splendid is a business consulting firm focused on the wedding industry, specifically for companies who work with high net worth or ultra high net worth brides, grooms, or wedding guests. So that means wedding venues, wedding professionals, but also those brands where couples and wedding clients aren't their core customer, but they do want a piece of it. So the hotels, the tourism destinations, the a big box store that sells rings as well, or someone doing a wedding registry, that type of thing. So I work with companies targeting brides, grooms, and wedding guests, specifically on the luxury end. I tend to work with people who've been in business for a minute, the wedding industry leaders, the leaders in hospitality, that type of thing. That's not a firm requirement, but I do find that mindset helps of, it's not so wishy-washy, like, oh, I don't believe in myself yet. Like, my advice is not going to help you if you don't have the chutzpah to like go out and put it in place. So and then it's thinksplendid.com, Think Splendid on all social media.
Amazing. Liene, this has been wonderful. Thanks for coming back on. And we have to have you come on inside of Weeva and do something for the community inside there. But we'll chat about that offline. This has been great. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. And we will see you in the next episode.
All right. Thanks.
Hey friends, Jonathan here, and I wanted to share about Common Sense Events consulting packages. If you are a venue owner and you're struggling with your marketing, your sales, your operations, or maybe there's just, you're new to the industry and you want to really have a leg up and get a jump start on getting your business going and not make a lot of the mistakes that oftentimes people make, the mistakes that we made, frankly, when we first started, we would love to chat with you and see if there's a way that we can serve you. Our team has experience working with over 10 venues all across the United States, doing consulting. We've hosted hundreds and hundreds of weddings at this point, and we know what it takes to be successful. If this sounds interesting to you, we would love to chat with you. You can either reach out by filling out the link in the description of the video or podcast, or you can just email us at venues@cseventservices.com, and we would love to chat with you and see if there's a way that we can serve you. All right, back to the show.